In the small town of Rockwell, Georgia, where time seemed to have stalled somewhere in the mid-20th century, the courtroom of the county courthouse felt more like a theater than a hall of justice. The old wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, the air hung thick with the scent of dust and aged varnish, and the walls were adorned with faded portraits of stern-faced judges from decades past. At the front of the room, behind a towering oak bench, sat Judge Clarence Hargrove, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm cloud rolling over the horizon. Hargrove was a relic of the Old South, a white-haired, sharp-tongued figure who wore his black robe like a king's mantle. At 68, he'd presided over Rockwell's court for nearly 3 decades, ruling with an iron fist and a worldview that hadn't budged since the days of Jim Crow. To him, justice wasn't blind. It had a very specific color, and he made sure everyone in his courtroom knew it. Locals whispered about his tirades, his tendency to hand down harsher sentences to black defendants, and his habit of dismissing anyone who dared challenge his authority. But in Rockwell, where tradition outweighed progress, few had the courage to stand up to him. On this humid Tuesday morning in July, the courtroom was packed. The case on the docket was a minor one, a shoplifting charge against a local teenager named Marcus Ellis, a 19-year-old black kid from the east side of town. Marcus was no stranger to trouble. He'd grown up in a neighborhood where cops patrolled like an occupying army, and where a wrong look could land you in cuffs. But this time, he swore he was innocent. The store clerk claimed Marcus had slipped a pack of gum and a soda into his pocket, but the security footage was grainy at best, and Marcus insisted he'd paid for everything. Still, in Hargrove's court, innocence was a privilege, not a right. Marcus sat at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his worn-out sneakers tapping nervously against the floor. His public defender, a young woman named Sarah Klein, who'd only been practicing for 6 months, shuffled through her notes, clearly out of her depth. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, an oily, middle-aged man named Ted Bowers, smirked as he adjusted his tie. The gallery buzzed with murmurs from townsfolk, some there for the drama, others because they knew Marcus's family. The session hadn't even started when trouble brewed. As Judge Hargrove banged his gavel to call the room to order, his eyes scanned the crowd and landed on a figure standing near the back, a tall, lanky teenager with a hoodie pulled low over his face. The kid wasn't doing anything unusual, just leaning against the wall, arms crossed, but something about him set Hargrove off. Maybe it was the way he stood, casual and unbothered, or maybe it was the fact that his dark skin peeked out from under the hood. Whatever it was, Hargrove's face twisted into a scowl. "You there!" Hargrove barked, pointing a bony finger toward the back. "Boy in the hood, what do you think you're doing in my courtroom?" The room fell silent. Every head turned to the teenager, who didn't flinch. He lifted his head slightly, revealing a pair of sharp, unflinching brown eyes. "Just watching, sir," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Watching?" Hargrove snapped, his southern drawl dripping with venom. "This ain't no damn show for you to gawk at. You got no business here unless you're a witness or a defendant. Get out. Now." Sarah Klein stood up hesitantly. "Your Honor, I believe he might be here to support the defendant. He's not causing any—" "I don't care what you believe, Miss Klein," Hargrove cut her off, his voice rising. "I run this courtroom, not you, and I don't tolerate riffraff loitering in my presence. Bailiff, escort this delinquent out." The bailiff, a burly man with a buzz cut, moved toward the teenager, who still hadn't budged. The kid raised a hand, as if to say, "Hold on," and spoke again. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I have every right to be here. This is a public courtroom." Hargrove's face turned beet red. "You talking back to me, boy? You think you can waltz in here and tell me how to run my court? Bailiff, get him out, now! And if he resists, cuff him." The bailiff grabbed the teenager's arm, but the kid didn't fight. He let himself be led toward the double doors, his head held high, those brown eyes locked on Hargrove the whole way. As the doors swung shut behind him, Hargrove muttered under his breath, loud enough for the front row to hear, "Damn troublemakers, ought to lock 'em all up." Marcus, still seated at the defense table, clenched his fists. He knew the teenager who'd just been thrown out. It was his older cousin, Jamal, who'd come to show support. Jamal wasn't like most folks in Rockwell. At 23, he'd already made a name for himself as someone who didn't back down, someone who'd spent years clawing his way out of the same East Side streets Marcus was trapped in. But to Hargrove, Jamal was just another black face to scorn. The trial began, and it went about as well as Marcus expected. Hargrove barely listened to Sarah's defense, rolling his eyes at every mention of the blurry footage or Marcus's character. Bowers, the prosecutor, painted Marcus as a habitual thief, a menace to Rockwell's good, hard-working people. Within an hour, Hargrove delivered his verdict. Guilty. 6 months in county jail, no parole. The gavel slammed down, and Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed. Outside the courthouse, Jamal stood on the steps, staring at the building with a fire in his eyes. He'd seen this script play out too many times. Black kids like Marcus chewed up and spit out by a system that never gave them a chance. But Jamal wasn't just angry, he was determined. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Yeah, it's me. Tell them I'm ready. It's time to shake this town up." Little did Judge Hargrove know, the delinquent he'd just thrown out of his courtroom was about to become the most powerful man in Rockwell's legal system. And Hargrove's reckoning was only beginning. Got it. I'll make Part 2 longer than Part 1, aiming for around 14,000 to 16,000 characters to give you more meaty content while keeping the story gripping and cohesive. It'll pick up right where Part 1 left off, diving deeper into Jamal's rise, the town's undercurrents, and the brewing tension with Judge Hargrove. Here we go. Part 2. The Rise. A game of trust and triumph. Jamal Ellis stood on the courthouse steps, the late morning sun beating down on his back as he ended his phone call with a quiet, "See you soon." He shoved the phone into his pocket and took a long, hard look at the building in front of him. The Rockwell County Courthouse loomed like a monument to everything he despised. Centuries of bias carved into its stone walls, upheld by men like Clarence Hargrove, who thought they were untouchable. But Jamal wasn't the same kid who'd grown up dodging police flashlights and ducking Hargrove's kind of justice. He'd spent the last 5 years turning his anger into action, and today's humiliation was just the spark he needed to light the fuse. Back in the east side of Rockwell, Jamal's story was already the stuff of legend. Born to a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, he'd grown up in a neighborhood where hope was a luxury most couldn't afford. The streets were a maze of crumbling row houses, corner stores with barred windows, and cops who treated every black kid like a suspect. Jamal had seen it all. Friends hauled off for nothing, families torn apart by sentences that didn't fit the crime, and a system that seemed designed to keep people like him down. By 15, he'd had his own run-ins with the law, a trumped-up loitering charge that landed him in Juvie for 3 months. That's where he met Mr. Carter, a grizzled old teacher who volunteered at the detention center and saw something in Jamal no one else had bothered to look for: potential. Carter didn't just teach Jamal math or reading. He taught him how to think, how to question, how to fight with his mind instead of his fists. "You're smarter than this place," Carter would say, tapping a finger against Jamal's forehead. "Don't let them define you." When Jamal got out, he took those words to heart. He graduated high school with honors, worked nights at a gas station to pay for community college, and then clawed his way into a full scholarship at Emory University's law school in Atlanta. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like pushing against a wall of doubt, from classmates who sneered at his accent to professors who assumed he'd drop out. But Jamal didn't just survive law school, he thrived. By 23, he'd passed the bar exam on his first try, a feat that stunned even his toughest critics. Now, standing outside the courthouse where his cousin Marcus had just been railroaded, Jamal wasn't just a lawyer with a shiny new degree. He was a man with a plan that had been simmering for months, ever since he'd heard whispers about Rockwell's district attorney retiring early due to a corruption scandal. The old DA, a good old boy named Hank Grayson, had been caught taking bribes from a local construction firm, and the fallout left the county scrambling for a replacement. Most folks assumed the job would go to Ted Bowers, the smarmy prosecutor who'd just put Marcus away. Bowers had the connections, the charm, and the right skin tone to keep Rockwell's power structure intact. But Jamal had something Bowers didn't: a groundswell of support from the East Side, a coalition of activists who'd watched him grow up, and a secret weapon named Lena Washington. Lena was a 40-something firebrand who ran a small civil rights nonprofit out of a storefront on Martin Luther King Boulevard. She'd known Jamal since he was a kid, back when she'd organized protests against police brutality in Rockwell. Lena had contacts: lawyers, journalists, even a few progressive politicians in Atlanta, and she'd been the one to convince Jamal to throw his hat in the ring for DA. "You're young, you're black, and you're from here," she'd told him over coffee one night. "That scares them more than anything. Use it." Together, they'd built a campaign from the ground up: door-to-door canvassing, late-night strategy sessions, and a social media blitz that caught the attention of national outlets like The Root and CNN. Jamal didn't have the money Bowers did, but he had something better: authenticity. And in a special election triggered by Grayson's resignation, that authenticity carried him to a narrow, stunning victory just 2 weeks ago. Today was supposed to be a quiet day, a chance to sit in on Marcus's case before officially starting as DA next Monday. Jamal hadn't planned on drawing attention, but Hargrove's outburst changed that. As he walked down the courthouse steps, his mind raced. He could still hear the judge's voice, "Get him out," echoing in his ears, a reminder of every time he'd been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside. But this time, Hargrove had messed with the wrong person. Jamal wasn't just some boy in a hood anymore. He was the new district attorney of Rockwell County, and he was about to turn Hargrove's world upside down. Back inside the courthouse, Hargrove was still basking in his petty triumph. He leaned back in his chair, sipping water from a chipped glass, and muttered to the bailiff, "Kids these days got no respect. Ought to teach 'em a lesson." The bailiff nodded absently, already thinking about lunch. The rest of the day's docket dragged on: traffic violations, a couple of DUIs, nothing Hargrove couldn't handle with his usual mix of scorn and impatience. By 4 p.m., he was ready to call it quits, his robes itching against his skin in the sticky Georgia heat. He didn't give the teenager in the hoodie another thought. To him, it was just another Tuesday. Meanwhile, across town, Jamal met Lena at her office, a cramped space cluttered with filing cabinets and protest signs. She greeted him with a grin, her braids swinging as she handed him a cup of lukewarm coffee. "Heard you got yourself kicked out of Hargrove's court," she said, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Good start, Mr. D.A." Jamal smirked, leaning against the desk. "Yeah, well, he's going to regret that. Marcus got 6 months for a pack of gum. 6 months. That's not justice. That's a vendetta." Lena's smile faded. "Hargrove's been doing this forever. You know that. He's got half the town in his pocket. Cops, prosecutors, even some of the council. You sure you're ready to take him on?" "I've been ready my whole life," Jamal shot back, his voice steady. "But it's not just about Hargrove. It's the whole damn system. Marcus isn't the first, and he won't be the last unless we do something." Lena nodded, pulling a stack of files from a drawer. "Then let's get to work. Your swearing-in's Monday, but you've got cases piling up already. Bowers left a mess, overturned convictions, plea deals that stink of favoritism, and the police union's already grumbling about the new kid coming in. Let 'em grumble, Jamal said, flipping through the files. They're about to find out I don't play by their rules. Over the next few days, Jamal threw himself into preparation. He met with his staff, mostly holdovers from Grayson's tenure, who eyed him warily, and started digging into Rockwell's legal underbelly. He found case after case of questionable arrests, excessive force complaints swept under the rug, and sentences that skewed heavily against Black and Latino defendants. Hargrove's name popped up again and again, a common thread in the worst of it. Jamal knew taking on the judge wouldn't be easy. Hargrove had allies, decades of clout, and a stubborn streak that bordered on delusion. But Jamal had something Hargrove didn't: the truth, and a growing army of people ready to back him up. By Sunday night, the East Side was buzzing. Word had spread about Jamal's election, and a small crowd gathered outside his mom's house, where he still lived until he could afford a place of his own. They brought food, music, and stories of their own run-ins with Hargrove's court. Jamal stood on the porch, listening, promising to fight for them. "This isn't just about me," he told them. "It's about us, all of us." Monday morning dawned bright and hot, the kind of day that made Rockwell feel like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Jamal put on his best suit, a navy blue number he'd bought secondhand, and drove to the courthouse for his swearing-in. The ceremony was small, held in a side room with a handful of officials, and Lena beaming in the front row. When he raised his right hand and took the oath, he felt the weight of it. Not just the job, but the history he was stepping into. He was Rockwell's first Black DA, and at 23, the youngest in the state's history. The room applauded, but Jamal's mind was already elsewhere, back in that courtroom where Hargrove had thrown him out. As he left the ceremony, a clerk handed him a note. "Judge Hargrove requests your presence in his chambers, 10 a.m. Jamal's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected the old man to reach out so soon. But if Hargrove wanted a meeting, he'd get one. One he'd never forget. "All right, I'll make Part 3 massive. Bigger than Parts 1 and 2 combined. Aiming for around 25,000 to 30,000 characters to really amp up the drama and depth. It'll pick up right where Part 2 ended, with Jamal heading to Judge Hargrove's chambers, and it'll explode into a full-on confrontation, weaving in courtroom tension, backstory, and the stakes for Rockwell. This will be a hefty chunk, so buckle up. Here we go." Jamal Ellis adjusted his tie as he strode down the dimly lit hallway of the Rockwell County Courthouse. The note from Judge Hargrove crumpled in his pocket. It was 9:55 a.m. on Monday, April 7, 2025, his first official day as district attorney, and already the old man was summoning him like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. The irony wasn't lost on Jamal. Just 5 days ago, Hargrove had tossed him out of this very building, sneering "boy" like it was a weapon. Now, Jamal was the one with power, or at least the title that came with it. He knew Hargrove wouldn't see it that way, not yet, but that was about to change. The courthouse was quiet, the morning's bustle still hours away. Jamal's footsteps echoed off the polished floors, each one a reminder of the path that had brought him here. From the East Side streets where he'd dodged cops and bullets, to the law school libraries where he'd burned the midnight oil, to this moment, standing at the threshold of a fight he'd been preparing for his whole life. He paused outside Hargrove's chambers, a heavy oak door with a brass nameplate that read "Honorable Clarence T. Hargrove," in stern, no-nonsense letters. Jamal took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and knocked. "Come in," came the gruff voice from inside, thick with the drawl of a man who'd spent his life barking orders. Jamal pushed the door open and stepped into a room that felt like a time capsule. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with leather-bound legal tomes that probably hadn't been opened in years. A Confederate flag hung discreetly in one corner, half hidden behind a potted plant, and a faded photo of Hargrove shaking hands with some long-dead governor sat on the desk. The judge himself was perched in a high-backed chair, his black robe swapped for a wrinkled suit jacket, a cigar smoldering in an ashtray despite the courthouse's no-smoking rule. His white hair was slicked back, and his watery blue eyes narrowed as Jamal entered. "Well, well," Hargrove said, leaning back with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "If it ain't the new DA, heard they swore you in this morning. Guess congratulations are in order. Or maybe condolences, depending on how long you last." Jamal didn't flinch. He crossed the room and took the chair opposite Hargrove without waiting for an invitation, meeting the judge's gaze head-on. "Thanks, Your Honor. I plan to stick around a while." Hargrove's smirk faltered, replaced by a scowl. "Don't get too comfortable, son. This ain't Atlanta. Rockwell's got its own way of doing things, and you'd do well to learn that quick." "I know how Rockwell works," Jamal replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I grew up here, watched kids like me get chewed up by your way of doing things for years. That's why I'm here, to change it." The judge let out a dry, raspy laugh, the kind that sounded more like a cough. "Change? Boy, you got some nerve. You think you can waltz in here with your fancy degree and undo decades of order? This town don't bend for nobody, especially not some—" He caught himself, but the unspoken word hung in the air like smoke. Jamal leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Go ahead, say it. You've been saying it loud enough in your courtroom for years. But let's get one thing straight, Judge. I'm not somebody. I'm the district attorney now, and last I checked, that means I've got just as much say in this town as you do." Hargrove's face darkened, his fingers tightening around the armrests of his chair. "You watch your tone with me. I've been running this court since before you were born. I don't need no wet-behind-the-ears kid telling me how to do my job." "Then maybe you should have done it better," Jamal shot back. "Marcus Ellis got 6 months for a pack of gum last week. 6 months. You call that justice? I call it a disgrace." "Marcus Ellis is a thief and a troublemaker," Hargrove snapped. "I saw the evidence. Case closed." "The evidence was a blurry tape and a clerk with a grudge," Jamal said, his voice rising slightly. "You didn't even give his lawyer a chance to breathe before you slammed that gavel. And don't think I didn't notice how quick you were to throw me out when I showed up to watch. What was it you called me? Riffraff? Delinquent?" Hargrove's eyes widened for a split second, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "That was you?" he muttered, then waved a hand dismissively. "Don't matter. You had no business being there, skulking around like some hoodlum." "I had every business," Jamal said, standing now, his voice steady but forceful. "That's my cousin you locked up. My family, my people. And I'm done watching you treat us like dirt under your shoe." The judge stood too, slower, leaning on the desk for support. "You think you can come in here and threaten me? I've seen a dozen DAs come and go, boy. You ain't the first to try and play hero, and you won't be the last to crash and burn." "This isn't a threat," Jamal said, stepping closer. "It's a promise. I'm going to dig into every case you've touched, every sentence you've handed down. Excessive charges, biased rulings, cozy deals with the police. I know they're there, and I'm going to find 'em. You've had your run, Judge. Time's up." Hargrove's jaw clenched, his cigar trembling in his hand. "You don't know what you're messing with. You start poking around, you'll stir up more than you can handle. This town's got roots deeper than you can dig." "Then I'll bring a bigger shovel," Jamal said, turning to leave. He paused at the door, looking back. "Oh, and one more thing. Next time you see me in your courtroom, I won't be in the back. I'll be at the front, running the show. Better get used to it." He walked out, leaving Hargrove fuming in silence, the cigar smoke curling up toward the ceiling like a storm cloud ready to burst. The confrontation was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Jamal threw himself into his new role with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through Rockwell. He started with the files Lena had given him, cross-referencing arrest records with court transcripts. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. Hargrove's courtroom was a machine of inequity. Black defendants were 3 times more likely to get jail time than white ones for the same offenses. Minor charges, like Marcus's shoplifting, ballooned into harsh sentences when the accused was poor or non-white, while well-connected locals walked free with a slap on the wrist. And the police? They were Hargrove's enforcers, feeding him cases with flimsy evidence and exaggerated reports, knowing he'd rubber-stamp their work. Jamal didn't stop at the numbers. He interviewed defendants, tracked down witnesses, and even sat in on Hargrove's sessions, taking notes from the gallery. The judge glared at him every time, but Jamal didn't care. He was building a case, not just against Hargrove, but against the whole rotten system. Lena helped, pulling strings to get a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution interested. Soon, whispers of the new DA started spreading beyond Rockwell, reaching civil rights groups and legal watchdogs who'd long ignored the small town's dirty laundry. Hargrove, meanwhile, wasn't sitting idle. He called in favors, meeting late at night with the police chief, a barrel-chested man named Roy Decker, and Ted Bowers, who'd taken a demotion to assistant DA after losing the election. "That kid's trouble," Hargrove growled over whiskey at Decker's hunting cabin. "He's digging where he shouldn't. We need to shut him down." Decker nodded, swirling his glass. "Got a couple boys on the force who can keep an eye on him. Maybe rattle him a bit. Accidents happen." "No accidents," Bowers cut in, nervous. "He's got too many eyes on him now. We need something legal. Discredit him. Tie him up in red tape." Hargrove smirked. "I like that. Find me something. A mistake? A scandal? Anything. He wants a war? I'll give him one." Back at the DA's office, Jamal was burning the candle at both ends. His staff, half of whom still resented taking orders from a 23-year-old, grumbled about the workload, but a few, like a paralegal named Maria Ortiz, stepped up. Maria, a Latina single mom who'd grown up in Rockwell, knew the East Side struggles firsthand. "My brother got 2 years from Hargrove for a busted taillight," she told Jamal one night, handing him a stack of files. "Cops planted weed in his car. I'll work late if it means sticking it to that bastard." "Thanks, Maria," Jamal said, his eyes bloodshot but determined. "We're gonna need all the help we can get." The tipping point came 3 weeks later when Jamal uncovered a bombshell. Buried in a 2018 case file was evidence of Hargrove colluding with Decker to suppress a brutality complaint. A black teenager, DeAndre Williams, had been beaten by 2 officers during a traffic stop, leaving him with a broken jaw and a concussion. DeAndre's family sued, but Hargrove dismissed the case, claiming insufficient evidence, despite a video that mysteriously vanished from the police station. Jamal tracked down DeAndre, now 24 and working at a warehouse in Macon, and got the full story. "They told me to keep my mouth shut," DeAndre said, his voice shaking. "Said if I didn't, they'd make it worse." Jamal brought the case to Lena, who connected him with a lawyer from the ACLU. Together, they filed a motion to reopen DeAndre's case, citing judicial misconduct. The filing hit Rockwell like a thunderclap. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, chanting Jamal's name, while Hargrove's allies scrambled to counterattack. Bowers leaked a story to the local paper, claiming Jamal was overzealous and unqualified, but it backfired. East Side residents flooded the editor with letters defending their new DA. The showdown came on a sweltering Friday in May. Hargrove had scheduled a hearing on a drug possession case. Another East Side kid named Tyrone Jackson caught with a joint in his pocket. Jamal decided to prosecute it himself, a rare move for a DA, but he wanted Hargrove to see his face at the front of the room. As he walked into the courtroom, the gallery buzzed. Half the East Side had shown up, along with reporters and a camera crew from Atlanta. Hargrove took the bench, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "Mr. Ellis," Hargrove said, his voice dripping with disdain as Jamal stood at the prosecution table. "Didn't expect to see you slumming it with the small fry. What's the matter? Too busy playing detective to do your real job?" Jamal didn't blink. "My real job's making sure this courtroom runs fair, Your Honor. Starting today." The crowd murmured, and Hargrove banged his gavel. "You watch yourself, boy. I won't have you turning my court into a circus." "It's not your court," Jamal said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's ours, and I'm here to take it back." The hearing erupted into chaos. Hargrove shouting, spectators cheering, and the bailiff scrambling to restore order. Tyrone's case ended in a plea deal, a slap on the wrist instead of jail time. But the real battle was just beginning. As Jamal left the courtroom, he knew he'd crossed a line Hargrove wouldn't forgive. The war was on, and Rockwell would never be the same. The air outside the Rockwell County Courthouse crackled with tension as Jamal Ellis stepped onto the steps, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the crowd. It was May 23rd, 2025, and the scene was unlike anything the sleepy Georgia town had witnessed in decades. Over 100 people, mostly from the east side, lined the sidewalk, their voices rising in a chant, "Justice now! Justice now!" Handmade signs bobbed above their heads. "End Hargrove's reign. Jamal fights for us. No more chains." A news van from Atlanta idled nearby, its camera trained on the young district attorney who'd just turned Judge Clarence Hargrove's courtroom upside down. Jamal raised a hand to quiet the crowd, but inside his heart pounded. He'd lit a match today, and Rockwell was about to catch fire. Inside, Hargrove slumped in his chambers, his hands trembling as he poured a shot of bourbon from a flask hidden in his desk. The hearing had been a disaster. That kid, Tyrone Jackson, should have been locked up, another notch on Hargrove's belt of keeping order. Instead, Jamal had waltzed in, demanded a plea deal, and turned the whole damn thing into a spectacle. Worse, he'd had the gall to stand there, in Hargrove's own courtroom, and say it wasn't his anymore. The judge's face burned at the memory, his pride stinging more than his arthritis. He'd spent 30 years building this kingdom, and now some punk barely old enough to shave was tearing it down. "Not if I can help it," Hargrove muttered, downing the shot and reaching for his phone. Across town, the fallout was already spreading. At the police station, Chief Roy Decker paced his office, barking orders at two of his most loyal officers, Sergeant Mike Callahan and Officer Travis Poole, a pair of hulking white men with buzz cuts and bad attitudes. "That DA's making waves," Decker growled, jabbing a finger at them. "He's poking into old cases. Williams, Jackson, all of 'em. We can't have him digging up dirt. Find me something to bury him with." "I don't care what it takes," Callahan smirked, cracking his knuckles. "Heard he's still living with his mama on the east side. Maybe we pay a visit, shake things up." "No," Decker snapped. "Too obvious. Hargrove wants this clean. Dig into his past, Juvie records, college, anything. Kid like that's gotta have skeletons." Poole nodded, already scrolling through his phone. "What about the cousin? Marcus? He's still in county. Could lean on him, get him to talk." Decker's eyes glinted. "Good. Start there. But keep it quiet. Last thing we need is more protesters." Meanwhile, Jamal drove back to the east side, the cheers of the crowd still ringing in his ears. He pulled up to Lena Washington's office, where she waited with Maria Ortiz and a small crew of volunteers. The storefront was a hive of activity, phones ringing, laptops humming, papers strewn across every surface. Lena greeted him with a fierce hug. "You did it, Jamal. That old buzzard didn't know what hit him." "Not yet," Jamal said, dropping into a chair. "But he's mad as hell. This isn't over." Maria handed him a stack of files. "Got more for you. 3 cases from 2022. Hargrove threw out excessive force complaints against Callahan and Poole. Witnesses say they saw the beatings, but their statements never made it to trial. Jamal flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. Same cops who roughed up DeAndre Williams. Patterns clear as day. Hargrove's been covering for them. More than that, Lena added, pulling up a grainy photo on her laptop. It showed Hargrove and Decker at a barbecue, laughing over beers, dated 2019. They're thick as thieves. Decker's boys do the dirty work. Hargrove cleans it up in court. Been that way for years. Then we take 'em both down, Jamal said, his voice low but resolute. File motions to reopen those cases. Get DeAndre's lawyer on board. And I want every arrest record from the last decade. Cross-check 'em with Hargrove's rulings. Lena raised an eyebrow. That's a mountain of work, Jamal. You sure? I didn't sign up for easy, he replied, already dialing the ACLU contact. Let's move. Over the next week, Rockwell split in two. The East Side rallied behind Jamal, their faith in him growing with every story he uncovered. Mothers who'd lost sons to Hargrove's gavel brought him casseroles. Teenagers who'd dodged police harassment painted murals of his face on abandoned buildings. But on the West Side, where the town's old money and power lived, resentment festered. Business owners grumbled about that uppity DA stirring trouble. The local paper, owned by a Hargrove crony, ran hit pieces claiming Jamal was radicalizing the community. At the country club, white-haired men in golf polos swapped theories about how to handle him, some legal, some not. Hargrove, Decker, and Bowers met again, this time at Bowers' sprawling house on the edge of town. The assistant DA paced nervously, a glass of wine in hand. He's got the ACLU now, Bowers said, and that Atlanta reporter's sniffing around. We're losing control. Then take it back, Hargrove snapped, slamming his fist on the table. I want him discredited. Yesterday. Decker leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. Poole's got something. Marcus Ellis, Jamal's cousin, cracked in county, says Jamal used to run with a rough crowd back in the day. Small-time stuff, but we can spin it. Say he's got a criminal past, unfit for office. Hargrove's lips curled into a sneer. Perfect. Leak it. Make it loud. The next morning, the story hit. New DA's ties to crime exposed, screamed the headline, complete with a blurry photo of Jamal at 15, standing with a group of East Side kids, one of whom held a joint. The article twisted Marcus's words, painting Jamal as a former gang member turned activist lawyer out to destroy Rockwell's values. By noon, it was all over X, with bots and locals amplifying the smear. West Side residents clucked their tongues. Talk radio hosts called for his resignation. Jamal saw it coming. He'd known they'd dig into his past, those Juvie days when he'd hung with the wrong crowd before Mr. Carter set him straight. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't ashamed either. It was survival, not a scandal. Still, the timing stung. He called a press conference that afternoon, standing on the courthouse steps again, this time with Lena and DeAndre Williams at his side. Yeah, I had a record, Jamal said into the microphones, his voice steady as the cameras rolled. I was a kid in a town that didn't give me a chance, but I turned it around. Graduated high school, law school, passed the bar. That's not a crime. What is a crime is a judge and a police chief burying evidence to protect their own. Ask DeAndre here what happened when he tried to speak up. Ask Tyrone Jackson why he almost went to jail for a joint while Hargrove's buddies walk free with DUIs. That's the story they don't want you to hear. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some jeering. DeAndre stepped up, his voice shaking but clear. They beat me bloody and laughed about it. Judge Hargrove said it didn't happen. Jamal's the only one who cared. The press conference flipped the script. National outlets picked it up, and hashtag Justice for Rockwell trended online. Protesters doubled outside the courthouse, now joined by activists from Atlanta and Macon. But Hargrove wasn't done. He called an emergency hearing the next day, dragging Jamal back into court on a fabricated ethics violation, claiming the DA had tampered with Tyrone's case by pushing the plea deal. It was flimsy, but Hargrove didn't care about winning. He wanted to humiliate Jamal, grind him down. The courtroom was a powder keg. Every seat was filled. East Siders on one side, West Siders on the other, reporters crammed in the back. Hargrove took the bench, his eyes glinting with malice. "Mr. Ellis," he began, "you stand accused of overstepping your authority. You got anything to say before I rule?" Jamal stood, his suit crisp despite the sweat trickling down his back. "Plenty, Your Honor. This isn't about ethics. It's about you. You've run this court like a dictator for too long. I've got files, witnesses, proof of your misconduct going back years. You want to talk tampering? Let's talk DeAndre Williams. Let's talk every case you buried to keep your friends happy." The gallery gasped. Hargrove's gavel slammed down. "You're out of line. Sit down, or I'll have you removed." "Remove me," Jamal said, stepping forward. "Go ahead, but it won't stop what's coming. The ACLU's filing a federal complaint tomorrow. Every ruling you've made's gonna be under a microscope. You're finished." Chaos broke out. Shouts, curses, the bailiff lunging for Jamal, but hesitating as the crowd surged. Hargrove roared for order, his face purple, but no one listened. Jamal walked out, head high, as protesters chanted his name. Behind him, Hargrove sank into his chair, the bourbon flask calling his name. That night, the East Side celebrated. Jamal's mom cooked a feast: fried chicken, collards, cornbread, and neighbors packed the house, toasting their DA. But Jamal couldn't relax. He stepped onto the porch, staring at the stars, when Lena joined him. "You kicked the hornet's nest today," she said. "They'll hit back harder." "I know," Jamal replied, his voice quiet, "but I'm not backing down." Across town, Hargrove sat in his dark living room, the TV blaring news of the Rockwell uprising. Decker was on the phone, frantic. "He's got the feds now, Clarence. We're screwed." "Not yet," Hargrove said, his voice a rasp. "I've got one card left, and it's a damn good one." Part 5. The Fall. A New Dawn. The clock ticked past midnight in Judge Clarence Hargrove's dimly lit living room, the glow of the television casting flickering shadows across his haggard face. It was May 24th, 2025, and Rockwell was a town on the brink. The news looped footage of the day's chaos: Jamal Ellis striding out of the courthouse, protesters clashing with police, and talking heads debating the Rockwell uprising. Hargrove's hands shook as he gripped the phone, Chief Roy Decker's voice crackling through the line. "We're screwed," Decker repeated, panic edging his usual bravado. But Hargrove's mind was elsewhere, fixed on the card he'd alluded to, a desperate final play to crush Jamal and reclaim his throne. He hung up without a word, stood, and shuffled to a locked drawer in his desk. Inside was a manila envelope, yellowed with age, its contents a secret he'd buried decades ago. "Time to cash this in," he muttered, his voice a dry whisper. Across town, Jamal sat on his mother's porch, the celebration inside still humming with laughter and music. The air was thick with the scent of fried chicken and hope, but Jamal's eyes were distant, locked on the horizon where the courthouse loomed. Lena's warning echoed in his head. They'll hit back harder. And he knew she was right. Hargrove wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Whatever came next would be ugly, personal, and aimed straight at him. His phone buzzed, a text from Maria Ortiz. "Feds confirmed. Investigation into Hargrove starts tomorrow. Stay safe." Jamal exhaled, a mix of relief and dread settling in his chest. The ACLU's federal complaint had teeth now, but so did Hargrove's spite. The war wasn't over yet. By morning, Rockwell woke to a bombshell. The local paper, still in Hargrove's pocket, splashed a new headline: DA's father linked to unsolved murder. The story claimed Jamal's dad, Terrence Ellis, a man who died when Jamal was 5, had been a suspect in a 1997 killing of a West Side shopkeeper during a robbery gone wrong. The article dredged up grainy mugshots, old police reports, and a single damning line. Sources say Judge Hargrove sat on evidence to protect the community. Until now. It was Hargrove's last card, a scandal from beyond the grave, meant to paint Jamal as the son of a killer, too tainted to lead. The East Side erupted in outrage. Jamal's mom, Denise, wept as neighbors rallied around her, insisting Terrence had been a good man, a truck driver framed by a racist system. Jamal, though, felt the blow like a punch to the gut. He barely remembered his father, just vague flashes of a deep laugh and strong hands lifting him onto a couch. But he knew the truth didn't matter. Hargrove was banking on the smear sticking long enough to derail him. At the DA's office, he called Lena, Maria, and DeAndre into a huddle. "They're grasping at straws," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "We don't stop. Feds are coming. Let's give 'em everything." The federal investigation hit Rockwell like a tidal wave. Agents from the Department of Justice descended on the courthouse, seizing files, interviewing staff, and subpoenaing Hargrove, Decker, and half the police force. Jamal handed over his evidence. Decades of case records, witness testimonies, the DeAndre Williams video he'd tracked down through a retired cop with a conscience. The streets buzzed with rumors. Hargrove was cracking, Decker was lawyering up, and Bowers had fled town, leaving a resignation letter on his desk. But Hargrove wasn't done fighting. He called a press conference that afternoon, standing on the courthouse steps in his full robe, clutching the manila envelope like a lifeline. "I've served this town faithfully for 30 years, Hargrove bellowed, his voice hoarse but defiant. "And I won't let some upstart ruin it with lies. Jamal Ellis wants to talk justice? Let's talk his father. A murderer I let slide because I believed in second chances. That's the man you're cheering for." The crowd, split between East Side supporters and West Side loyalists, exploded. Boos clashed with cheers, fists flew, and a line of cops struggled to keep order. Jamal watched from his office window, Lena at his side. "He's desperate," she said. "Dragging your dad into this? Low, even for him?" "It's not about truth," Jamal replied, grabbing his coat. "It's about distraction. I'm ending this, now." He marched to the courthouse, pushing through the throng until he faced Hargrove on the steps. The judge smirked, but his eyes betrayed fear. "Come to confess, boy?" Hargrove taunted, waving the envelope. Jamal snatched a megaphone from a protester. "You want to talk my father?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Let's talk yours, Judge. How about that photo in your office? Your daddy in a Klan hood, 1952. Or the land your family stole from black farmers after Reconstruction. You've got no high ground here. And that envelope? It's a lie. My dad was cleared. Records prove it. You're the one with blood on your hands." The crowd roared, East Siders surging forward as Hargrove's face crumpled. He lunged at Jamal, but the bailiff restrained him, dragging him back inside as federal agents swarmed the scene. Jamal stood firm, the megaphone shaking in his hand. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about every kid you locked up, every family you broke. We're done with you." That night, Hargrove's empire collapsed. The feds arrested him on charges of evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations, based on Jamal's files and decades of buried complaints. Decker followed, caught on wiretaps plotting to frame Jamal. The courthouse became a crime scene, its halls echoing with the clatter of agents boxing up history. Hargrove sat in a holding cell, staring at the wall, his robe replaced by an orange jumpsuit. His card had failed. The DOJ confirmed Terrence Ellis had been falsely accused, a scapegoat for a West Side cover-up Hargrove himself had orchestrated. Rockwell didn't heal overnight. The West Side seethed, some vowing to fight the federal takeover, while the East Side celebrated with block parties that lasted a week. Jamal worked tirelessly, overturning wrongful convictions. Marcus was released within days, hugging his cousin on the courthouse steps as cameras flashed. The new judge, a black woman named Anita Brooks, appointed by the state, took Hargrove's bench, her first ruling a dismissal of Tyrone Jackson's probation. Lena's nonprofit grew, funded by donations pouring in from across the country. Maria became Jamal's deputy DA, her quiet strength a backbone for the office. A month later, on June 30th, 2025, Jamal stood at a podium in the town square, addressing a crowd of thousands, black, white, Latino, young, old, united by a fragile hope. "We tore down a wall," he said, his voice carrying over the cheers. "But the work's just starting. This isn't my victory, it's ours. Let's build something better." Behind him the courthouse loomed, its stone face unchanged, but its soul reborn. Hargrove's portrait was gone, replaced by a blank space waiting for a new legacy. Jamal glanced at it, then at his mom in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. He thought of Mr. Carter, of Terrence, of every East Side kid who'd never gotten a chance. "For you," he whispered, stepping off the stage into a future he'd fought to create. Rockwell wasn't perfect. Tensions lingered, scars ran deep, and the fight for justice stretched on. But for the first time in generations, the town breathed freer, its shadows a little less dark. Jamal Ellis, the boy in the hood, had become its reckoning and its redemption.